Chapter 1. The reflection lost will has to give. Because you have read The Reflection Lost Will Has to Give does not mean you understand it. You have a long way to go in understanding the reflection lost will has to give. But the more you look at it, the more you will see. And if you give in to the emotional movement you need, you will learn to understand it. There is no way you can understand this material mentally unless you allow the emotional movement you need. It is impossible. You have to go through the emotional body to understand what is being spoken to you here. If you do not think these books mean anything, you can be sure your emotional body is heavily denied. If you have an instant rapport with these books and feel you understand them, I also want to tell you, you do not understand them as deeply as you need to. Most of what has been given in original cause so far has been toward the purpose of reawakening you to your judgment patterns. These judgment patterns are old judgment patterns, so old that they are your original cause. What you hold as your most treasured beliefs are not understandings. They are judgments made in advance of understanding your experience. The more you have looked around you and thought your judgment patterns or attempts to make sense of things did make sense, the more you have lived within the reality created by your judgments. Until now, there is so little vibration left in you, it is as though you are unconscious and almost totally unable to remember anything other than the way it is now. Most of you cannot even clearly remember yesterday or last month, let alone the origins of your being. The reason for this lack of emotional presence, if you think about it, you will realize that the things you remember most vividly are because you had strong emotional reasons to remember them. And, by the same token, the things you have most totally repressed, you also had strong emotions that you believed called for repression as a means of survival. More people are losing consciousness from boredom than anything else right now. In their quest for non-existent excitement, many people are turning to some of the most depraved areas of the lost will because they have a vague memory that something happened there that at least stirred them. Willlessness is now so progressed on Earth that you are becoming more and more like a cross between robots and economic slaves who do not have minds of their own anymore. So many of you have to frighten yourselves into thinking you are about to die, or at least be horribly injured, in order to feel anything anymore. Those of you who have gone even too vegetative for that sit in front of television sets and watch this happen to the people in the programs. You want me or someone else to tell you what to do, whether or not you admit it. Guilt is most of the reason for the lack of movement that could give excitement to life. Every time momentum has gotten going toward anything that looks like evolution on Earth, guilt has risen against it and shut it down. All of you have your pet examples of this, but the one I would like to mention now is the way in which what looked like gains in the 1960s are being reversed in the 1980s, and how apologetic so many of the 1960s people look now. I would also like to point out that guilt has also been responsible for shutting down momentum that has looked like regression. Thus, guilt has been both the enemy and the hero, depending upon which movement it is squashing This is because guilt has no consciousness except that which you give it. In itself, it is simply lack of movement. And in this, guilt is not going to change. But if you get moving, you will no longer have guilt. The problem is how to move when everything out there looks so limited and restrictive, especially when gapped rage has been enforcing the lack of movement guilt demands of any essence that touches it. This is why you have to learn to understand and deal with the cause and not struggle anymore with the effect. Guilt is so pervasive that you are going to feel it is impossible to be free of it, even if you can figure out what it really is. The problem you are having with guilt is because it has been mixed in with my light from the very beginning. It has not been recognized for what it is. From the beginning, guilt has been called love, or has at least been thought to have loving intent. There is guilt mixed in with my teachings all the way along, even in these. It is unavoidable, since the recognition of guilt comes with the evolution of love understanding itself. You need to move into the recognition of guilt as you can handle it. If I were to give you a lesson in guilt-free living right now, you would not think it was my light talking. If I told you the story, stopping to point out all the guilt, there would be no story left. Only confusion, trying to rid itself of guilt without the framework in which to understand what guilt is. This is what has already been happening, and the lost will is a case in point of the baby being thrown out with the bathwater. You have no way to feel what unconditional love is until you move the emotions you have held outside of love, and you have no images of what it would be like to be guilt-free. The only people you see who are giving the appearance of being guilt-free have denied guilt and show you the reflection of what you think it would be like to be guilt-free. The more you have thought guilt was love, and that to be otherwise would be unloving, the more ruthless and selfish these people appear to be, and are, for that matter. If you do not think guilt is a serious problem, or do not think you need to heed my cautions not to go past it, let me say this to you. Hitler was one of my guilt reflections. Hitler reflected everything I feared I would be if I did not hold back my rage. When I had to realize Hitler was me in a state of denial and how little I could do to stop him, I was horrified. I saw Hitler in me from the very beginning, and yet nothing I did was able to alter the course. Seeing it is one thing. Actually reaching the lost will is quite another. As you can see by this, the ability to disarm these denials has come to me very recently, although understanding has been there for a long time. Following the path of guilt, or even the path of guilt mixed with love, is showing clearly that guilt is not love and does not engender life. Thus, the path of guilt is not right. But this does not mean that guilt has been wrong either. Guilt is neither right nor wrong in itself. Guilt is nothing really, in that anything said about it will be correct in some situations and incorrect in others. When people have tried to move past guilt without understanding what they were really doing, guilt has caught up with them later in the form of the reversals seen throughout history. Many of these reversals have been seen, but they have not been thoroughly understood for what they really were and still are. I will be expanding on this as we move along. Hitler was a mammoth guilt reflection for me that caused reversals in the lives of many people who could not understand the guilt they had that drew this into their lives. Understand, Hitler was not my light. He was my light in a state of denial. Hitler was a guilt reflection, but he was not the guilt. What I denied here, because I felt guilty about having it, went out reflecting what I feared it was and what I had judged it to be. This does not let you know what it really was, but what Hitler was reflecting is a good starting place, because that is the reality that was experienced around Hitler. I hated myself so much in the denials Hitler held that Hitler was hatred manifest. Hitler was also empowered by many who hated their rage as I did mine. I had gapped myself from this rage so seriously that for a long time I did not recognize it as myself. I saw only the part of me that was horrified at what Hitler was doing. And in this part of me, I did not know how I had created Hitler and others like him. For a long time, I said I had not done it because I had a devil in my creation who had done it. I lost control of Hitler in my terror of gapped rage. The denied rage manifested in Hitler, and the denied terror manifested in his victims. These emotions tried to come forward during the emergence of the rainbow spirits and were pushed into a state of denial by the part of ourselves that was fighting things down. We already had the father warriors within us, acting as police and military, keeping down what we found to be so unacceptable in ourselves. We did not want to allow any hole through which it could creep out. Of course, it did anyway. The rainbow spirits have involvement with us here, and we are all still having the fight in red in the Middle East. It is not a good sign that, even now, what is happening in the Middle East is being so misunderstood and ill-received because the denials involved are not being seen for what they are. Openness has not been allowed here, and by now the guilt is immense that says openness cannot be allowed around the feelings that are involved here. And yet, openness must come in here, or the lost will in the survival chakra is not going to live long enough to help us live. What did not manifest in the massive enactment Hitler kingpinned was his terror and the rage of his victims. These were even more seriously denied than what manifested around Hitler already in a state of denial. These deeper denials are moving now, and the hatred, ultimately to be seen as self-hatred, is immense. The hatred still being held in a state of denial is so immense that all the hatred felt at the time of Hitler was only just enough to relieve some of the pressure on the rest of what is held in a state of denial. I have to tell you more about the fight in red and its far-reaching implications as we go along. I hated the mother and the father of manifestation for tumbling out of control across the heavens, manifesting helter-skelter in what looked to me like a frenzy of orgasmic insanity that would not stop. As far as I was concerned, they had ruined any chance of having balance in creation, or of having heart presence manifest in the rainbow spirits. I hated the rainbow spirits for allowing themselves to emerge here when they knew they didn't have the balance necessary. It looked like mayhem to me, and I felt trapped in it because I felt I had no choice but to throw my light in after the mother and the father manifestation when I found I could not stop them. I felt they had rushed ahead of me and manifested half the rainbow spirits before I ever caught up with them. It seemed to me they did not want to let me catch up because they did not like the position I wanted to take and didn't want to hear what I had to say about it. When I did catch up with them in red, I was so furious I wanted to kill everybody involved, and I was made even more furious by their lack of receptivity to me here. They were either openly defiant or acting like they didn't, couldn't, or wouldn't receive me. I didn't move my rage here, or I might have killed them all. Instead, I fought it down and shoved it into a state of denial, trying to approach them in a civil manner, because I thought I would stand a better chance of getting through to them that way. I have allowed myself to move my rage now, and I see that I could have killed them then. So it was not wrong that I denied it until I had greater understanding in which to let it up. But by the time I got these understandings, the path of destruction these denials took had almost cost us creation and the Spirit's feeling of desire to live in it. I hated my rage so much, I allowed only my insecurities to manifest in the demeanor of asking everyone to please receive me here. Given the rage these same fears and insecurities were pushing back, I also lost control and hit the Father of Manifestation several times. Nonetheless, I manifested only what I had acceptance for around the issues themselves. In every place else, my denials took hold. I wanted to thrash the Father of Manifestation so thoroughly, and the Mother too, that they might not have lived through it. I didn't know who I hated more, the Father of Manifestation for taking this sex action with the Mother, or the Mother for drawing his desire out into the biggest direction I had ever seen. He was shaking like it had taken over him, jerking spasmodically and dripping. She was licking it and acting like she was drinking from a fountain. I was horrified and at the same time more excited than I had ever been. I hated the horror, but not as much as I feared the excitement and what it meant. It was so bestial and lustful, carnal and thirsty. It was like an insatiable lust to have orgasms so intense I was losing consciousness because I could not stay present for them. I allowed myself to go unconscious, feeling orgasms so intense I cannot describe them to you even now, only to awaken and find them already at it again. What I can tell you now is that the Mother and the Father of Manifestation were working themselves into frenzies of motion, which made me unsure as to whether they were fighting or making love. I could not tell if the Mother wanted to have sex on these terms, or if the Father of Manifestation was forcing this on her by overpowering her. She was screaming for help from my light, but I could not get in there enough to help her, and each time I tried, the father of manifestation, pushed me back. He appeared to be suffocating the mother and holding her down in positions that were not allowing her to move. She seemed to be fighting him with everything she had, which was not much strength compared to his, and yet moving in ways that were causing his erection to grow bigger all the time. I cannot allow him to hurt her, I thought, but yet I did not move to save her either. They were snorting and growling and making noises I cannot describe. Every little while, their frenzies went into a loss of control and spasmodic jerkings, which did not calm down for quite some time, and which left them covered with a wetness I was not sure I liked. The mother and the father of manifestation had lost control of themselves in the most bestial and carnal lust I had ever witnessed, and I was not sure it was love, because I already knew we had problems with the balance that would have allowed heart's presence to be manifest. I hated the entire situation and judged against it heavily as base, carnal lust at its most depraved level. The lack of acceptance I had for it gave it a disgusting quality for me that I find hard to move out even now. And yet, I want the intensity of these feelings to come within love now. I already had these pictures hidden in my mind, and they were out now. I didn't want to claim them. I wanted to blame them on someone else. The mother and the father of manifestation looked to me like the perfect cause that these things had manifested. Not only their behavior, but they themselves were looking bestial to me now, like their fall from spirit says I did. The more I tried to communicate with them in red, the more lustfully they looked at one another, as though the more I told them they could not allow this behavior, the more they wanted to do it. I felt furiously impotent, because I could see them looking at one another like they were going to go ahead with it, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. I wanted to beat them furiously and cut them up in little pieces, but I did not allow myself to move here. I felt like they were deliberately allowing themselves to defy the plan Hart and I had so carefully worked out. They had not listened to it from the beginning. They had never listened to it, and they weren't listening to it now. They were openly defying me, just like everyone else who followed their lead. While I hated the rainbow spirits for allowing themselves to manifest here when they knew they didn't have the balance necessary for their own emergence, I hated them even more for pretending that they did not know they had emerged, and for acting this pretense out by refusing to unfold into manifestation, as though this would allow them to avoid taking responsibility for what they had done. I hated them for refusing to unfold and receive my light here, because they didn't want to hear what I had to say about their emergence. My rage thought it was frightening them into remaining clumped together. But no matter what tack I took, they refused to receive me. I sent Hart to them in many desperate attempts to get them to open and receive the light they needed to have, and which was not present at their emergence, and they never opened to receive him either. I was furious at them for pretending in this way that they had not really emerged, and for remaining clumped together in this pretense of acting like they didn't notice me, or anything, or anyone else in manifestation. They turned a deaf ear to me every time I tried to address them here, and I got more and more furious every time, always denying it in favor of a more loving approach. The truth of the matter was, They had emerged, and they needed to face up to it or allow themselves to go back. Neither move was being made on their part because they had no wills with which to move. It looked to me like it was going to be up to us to move them around, and I was not happy about it. I already had this situation with the angels, and that was making me mad enough. With only the mother in the will polarity, I didn't see how she could hold open enough space. I had had holding back in mind and allowing creation to unfold at a leisurely pace so that we could gain the balance we needed each step of the way. The mother had been constantly telling me that she was feeling pressured to go faster than she felt like she could go. I thought we had an agreement, that we had problems, and we weren't going to create any more until we had solved the ones we already had. The mother was always complaining about lack of balance as the cause of these problems. She talked a lot about how important balance was for her to be able to go ahead in the faith that everything was all right. Ha! Some balance this lusty will of mine was showing me now. It was clear to me that she was ready to throw balance away as soon as the Father of Manifestation moved himself on any of her erotic parts, which, infuriatingly, seemed to be all of her parts. No matter where or how he touched her, she was moving in sexually provocative response. The more I told her holding back was necessary, the more she moved toward the Father of Manifestation in outrageously sexual ways, and right in front of me, as though she enjoyed outraging and infuriating me to see how far she could go. I had the feeling that even if I had pulled out a whip and beaten her at that moment, she would have liked it. She was arching herself toward the Father of Manifestation and pulling him toward her. She was wrapping herself around him and moving on his body like a snake. She was even looking like a snake now, pulling the Father of Manifestation down onto her, asking him to come into her, and acting like she wanted to go into him. She tried to entwine herself around me, and when I drew back, I thought for a moment she was going to strike me, but she only hissed. She was shivering and shuddering and acting like she was seeking warmth, but it felt to me like she was seeking more orgasms. I judged her even more heavily now, and I wished I had the power not to allow her to move unless I had control of her. She let me have a breath of fire in that moment, and I knew there was nothing more I could do with her. Where was her fear with which she had been constantly nagging me now? Now she was not the mother who was afraid of displeasing me. Instead of fearing my disapproval, it was as though she were now enjoying it. It was open defiance, and I hated her for it. I wanted to punish her in every way I could. I hated the Father of Manifestation for his part in keeping her aroused, but somehow I hated her more for enticing him in these ways. I wanted to scream at everyone involved. No one listens to my plan. If you don't listen to my plan and do it my way, you're not going to do it at all. I shoved these screams into a state of denial, with the feeling that I could not do anything effective about it. The manifested spirits were obviously going their own way, no matter what I did about it, and so, apparently, were the Mother and Father of Manifestation. I felt impotent to stop them, and so instead of screaming what I at first wanted to scream, I told them they were going to suffer the consequences if they didn't do everything according to my plan. We had a hell of a fight in red, but we shoved it into a state of denial that went tumbling out into the darkness of space, tearing and clawing at one another like we didn't want any life left when we were done. Meanwhile, we thought this was doing our best to remain civil with one another in the presence of these intense undercurrents. And so it happened that the mother began another series of orgasms that emerged the other half of the rainbow spirits and brought our return to the Godhead. I went along because I knew returning home was necessary, but I had grave reservations about the way it was being handled all the way along. So many things were left unmoved there that it has made the Kundalini energy that must return will to spirit very dangerous for any who do not understand what is really happening there. And it has literally killed most people with heart attacks when they have lost control of it. And this has been the case in spite of the more reserved orgasms of the rainbow spirit's will polarity. In spite of my feelings of impotence, I was able to exert much more control than I realized at the time. So much so that the Kundalini energy went almost totally into a state of denial. But all of the control I was able to exert still has not been enough in the eyes of some who think the Kundalini energy should not be allowed to move at all. Yet, in the eyes of the rainbow spirits, the emergence of their will polarity has so reserved and controlled that many of the spirit polarized rainbows thought they must have emerged backwards, and that this emergence was really meant for them. Many of them have even made the claim that all of creation emerged backwards and needed to flip over. After a long time of ignoring them as wrong here, I have begun to take their claims more seriously. The fighting you are seeing now in the Middle East is among the spirits who are holding most of these denials. But the ones most involved in the fighting are not the ones who have made these denials, nor are they the ones who can bring light into the situation. Neither can the father warriors who have rushed in to play their old role of trying to hold these denials back and down bring the light that is needed here. The four parts of God and all of the Godhead spirits have involvement here, as well as the parental parts of the rainbow spirits. We are the ones who have made the denials that must move now to let in the light of love that is necessary in the Middle East. The Middle East is moving now in a state of denial because what is being held there cannot be held anymore. Already, movement in the mother and me is being felt there, but it is not manifest yet as love because heart and body have not allowed themselves to move everything they need to move there yet. Body has his moves to make for manifestation to gain the balance necessary for life, but heart's denials are also involved, and much more than people might like to think. Heart's denials have been manifesting as Nazi essence, along with the rest of our denials of love there. Heart has long thought he was not involved because he was not present for what took place during the manifesting of the rainbow spirits. But heart was present as denied heart. Even though heart is moving here, the definition of love still needs so much expansion that the Nazis are still more involved than you might like to think. Not only are they moving again as hate groups in many countries, but they have hidden their presence in Israel in large numbers. This is why Israel is looking like a form that has been victimized and yet is turning around and perpetuating the victimization it received, as though nothing in the way of compassion and understanding was learned there. It appears this way because there has been a form change you have not recognized. Nazis have been incarnating into Israel, not only because it is the best possible hiding place they could find, but also for many other reasons that will become clear as you go along. The law of karma is also working here to place perpetrators in the place they created for their victims. But the shortcomings of this so-called law are also apparent, since the essence involved is not learning the lessons hoped for. This is because they are denial spirits who cannot evolve as they are. They are manifestations of denials made in the Godhead and by the rainbow spirits, and so they are lost will that cannot be escaped. The American Indians have heart involvement here also that has not been able to escape the lost will, which has been pursuing them, incarnating into their forms, and making it look like the Indians are selling out to the ways of the Father Warriors. It was Nazi essence that discovered the Indians in America and fought them down. It is Nazi essence opposing the blacks in South Africa right now. It has been Nazi essence every time there has been a hateful attempt at the extermination of spirits on earth. Just as loving alignment creates heart, denial creates denied heart. The most serious denials of heart created hate. The Nazis are denied heart that hates. The way the hatred is directed determines the form it takes. These denials always do what they do while claiming some other nobler, more loving intent for themselves, so much so that many of the key figures have been made out to be heroes in the whitewashed Father Warriors versions of history. You may even want to say that they are not such bad guys if you just sit down and talk to them. I want you to know that Hitler captivated many of the intellectuals of Europe with his mystical intelligence and strange outlook. Ronald Reagan captivated many people in the United States. This does not mean they are loving men. The gap has been instructed to hide what it holds. And as long as the denial spirits in the gap do this, they are in control of the situation. If things start coming out into the open enough that they lose control, that is when they show what they are holding. The very ones you think are not such bad guys, if you just sit down and talk to them, are involved in what the gap is holding, and they act it out whenever their strings are pulled. You might be quite surprised, in fact, to see who is really giving the orders, for example, to torture people in darkened chambers beneath the prison systems. I want you to know that loss of control in the gap is just as frightening as it was feared to be. It is terrifying, in fact. Loss of control is what the gap fears the most. And loss of control is also what everyone who has made denials into the gap fears the most. As you move into your own gapped emotions, you will need to exercise some form of control over the expression you allow them, because they have been operating so far from your normal spectrum of consciousness. It is not advisable to just turn gapped emotions loose, because the form they have been taking in a state of denial is the same form they will, at first, want to take in the one who has been denying them. And they will have power over you at first, just as they have had in the world. The Nazis are self-hatred made manifest. but they do not allow themselves to notice they hate themselves any more than the blame and the original denials allowed this to be noticed. They are full of self-righteousness, in fact. But the most dangerous thing about the form change here is that it is allowing the Nazis to gain what appears to be a more overt alliance with those who oppose them in World War II. These father warriors appear to be the same ones that were in power during the Second World War and the Western Alliance, but there has been a form change here also. Different orders of father warriors have moved into the power positions on Earth now, because the deeper levels of lost will they oppose are trying to move. It is their intent to stop the movement, to open the seventh seal, which is the survival chakra. They are widely proclaiming themselves to be the saviors of peace on earth, but they are actually trying to deliver the death blow while claiming their actions are all coming from loving intent. While the Nazis are heart denials, they are not the ones who can move it. This hatred needs to move in the heart spirits themselves. The rest of the father warriors involved are other spirits' denials from the Godhead on down. The spirits involved are holding back the emotions that most need to move now to end the acting out of these denials. The outer struggle is showing you the manifestation of the judgment patterns involved, but the outer struggle is not the place to find resolution. Resolution must come from inside yourselves, where you have made the judgments that it is impossible to allow these emotions to move and survive them. It was believed at the time of the Rainbow Spirit's emergence that if we allowed ourselves to have the fight we wanted to have in red, there would be nothing left of us or of creation. There was an immense amount of emotion denied here, so immense and intense that it amounted to hating, blaming rage that the plan for manifesting creation was not going right. We all blamed one another, and we were all too frightened and uncertain of our own roles to allow ourselves to accept the blame then. My rage at the mother and the father of manifestation was immense, so immense that I could not see past it to my own responsibility here. I insisted that they had rushed ahead of me and unfolded creation without allowing my light to be fully present. I saw it as a power play on their part that did not want to empower me by allowing my guidance. I did not think there should have been so many rainbow spirits, and I blamed it on the mother and the father of manifestation. I blame them for having irresponsibly manifested a fragmented bunch of spirits because of their selfish and insatiable appetite for one another. My rage was being pushed away from me as fast as I was able to do it, with the heavy judgment that it was unloving. But I did allow myself to notice that it was giving me pictures of throwing them out of creation, of destroying everything they had manifested and starting over, of tearing out their sexual organs, and of getting revenge by administering the most terrible of sexual tortures, designed to make them unable to feel these appetites within themselves anymore. When I saw pictures of them finding ways to enjoy even this, I saw myself beating them in a frenzy. I blamed the mother for her sexuality and for having called forth the father of manifestation to attempt to satisfy it. I believed the father of manifestation wanted to come between us so that he could take the mother and put me in a position of having to try to come into him from behind. If you look back over the emergence of the rainbow spirits, you may find involvement you did not know you had, because this is one of the favorite and yet most heavily denied sexual fantasies of many men, to fuck a woman while having another man fuck them from behind. In fact, the way into the emotions that need to move here is to go into your sexuality, especially your denied sexuality, and find all the feelings you have around it. There is terror around emerging spirits being acted out in childbirth, along with rage about the way it is being handled. There is gapped rage and terror concerning the roles of the parents, which also has a massive reflection on the animal kingdom. There is rage and terror around the issue of how satisfying sexual feelings are and aren't, and around the actual act of lovemaking itself, which now contains so much denial that it is often more like hate-making. You need to look at what happens and also at what doesn't happen regarding your sexuality. There is so much to move here. It is going to be very intense to get through it, but it must be done. These are but some of the aspects of the issue of gapped hatred between men and women. I could not see that the mother was unable to hold back the emergence of the rainbow spirits because of the growing pressure of their light within her. I blamed her loss of control on her sexual appetite. I was about as insensitive here as those who want to punish a mother during labor by telling her if she doesn't like it, she should not have had sex, or those who want to tell a mother to hold back during the push stage of labor because they are not ready for the delivery. At the time, I could not understand what had caused the mother to go tumbling out of control, down into the very darkness of space she had so feared all the rest of the time I had known her. Why suddenly now, before I was ready to handle it? I had barely gotten free of the other spirits around us, and I felt I needed some time with the mother and the father manifestation to reestablish my relationship with them for a little while, especially concerning Heart's absence, before we emerged any more spirits. I was denying it, but I was feeling enraged at the mother and the father manifestation for not having more control and for not allowing my light to rev up more before we got started. I hated them for not giving me more time between emergences in which to receive the spirits and find out how the spirits felt about their own emergences. It was as though they were running away in deliberate defiance of my wishes here. I already knew the rainbow spirits were going to need a lot of help, and I wanted my light to be as present as possible. I made no connection at the time between the increase in the light from the amount of celebrating we had done over the emergence of spirits in the heavens and the pressing need to open space. The increase in the light was pressing on the mother so much, she was already fearing being pushed on too hard and repeating her original fall. She felt she had no ability to hold herself back, and she was running away from me in terror, but not knowing why. She was desperately trying to open enough space, not knowing what she was doing or why she was doing it. She was trying to stop us from giving her any more light, trying to fight the Father of Manifestation off whenever he caught her, screaming in the feeling of fragmenting whenever he overwhelmed her with light, and yet allowing him to hold her at times because she was so terrified of going off the deep end and losing our light altogether. I had almost no recognition of what the mother was experiencing, except that I felt desperate about letting her get too far from me. The Father of Manifestation allowed himself to notice more than I did, but he did not know how to read it. The mother was desperate to give birth because she was unable to hold the spirits within her anymore. She was struggling to get away from my light because she feared my insistence on revving up the light even more was going to make her feel less able to hold herself back, as I had been insisting she do. She could not be at peace with her own moves because she feared my displeasure meant she was inadequate. She feared me, but she denied her sexual rage toward me. The mother was losing control of herself. She did not want to surrender control to anyone else because she did not trust our sensitivity to her, and she feared what all of this meant. She was like a mother being told not to have any more children when she has no means to stop it. The Father of Manifestation was trying to keep a grip on her, both by going into her and by trying to hold her back, but he could not handle her any more than I could. She was fighting him at the same time as she wanted to receive him. She knew she needed his help, but she was enraged at him for his lack of sensitivity about how to give it. The Father of Manifestation felt inadequate here, but also blamed the mother, and none of the feelings were allowed to come into the openness needed. The mother didn't know if she could trust the Father of Manifestation or me not to pressure her with more than she could handle. I was pouring more light into the Father of Manifestation than he was able to hold, and he wasn't able to give it all to the mother. He felt pressured by my light to move more toward the mother than she wanted him to. He felt trapped between us. In my fear of shortchanging the rainbow spirits, I went to the other imbalance of overdoing it with them, just as most of them overdo their own parenting job. In wanting to make sure they had all they needed, they had much more than they needed. When they could not hold it either, they fragmented much more than they would have otherwise. I was like mind, unable to trust its own intuition or its body to find the balance that would be appropriate. Will and body could not trust themselves here either, because I was not receiving their feelings about how creation should have been made manifest. From the very beginning, they should have been included in our plans. But Hart and I thought it was only necessary to have them manifest and give form to what we had envisioned and understood. When the mother did not act like she wanted to be present for our planning stages of creation, we allowed ourselves to see this as proof that we were right. She wasn't really interested in our plans. We did not allow ourselves to see that her disinterest was because we were not making any real space for her presence, or allowing the will movement she needed to remain present or stay interested. In other words, we were much too dry and boring for her, mental and scientific, she would call it now. Lost will has since manifested all of the judgments we made then about the supposed differences between the male and the female brain, while science has never found any real difference and has put the difference off on hormones. Whatever her reasons or ways and means were, the mother kept feeling like something was missing, and she kept going to the edge of space and looking for it as though she was expecting it to appear there. She kept distracting my attention by doing this, and as much as she was making me nervous, she was also making me mad.